Second passage this morning comes from a book that you just have to say with confidence, Habakkuk. It is a prophet. Habakkuk was a prophet, and we're actually reading the last three verses in this three-chapter book of a prophet, Habakkuk. Though the fig tree does not blossom, and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails, and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the God of my salvation. God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer, and makes me tread upon the heights. This is God's word for God's people. So where were you when the plane first hit the World Trade Center? Can you remember? You know, most of the people I talked to who were doing something on that day can tell you exactly what they were doing. I was an overnight chaplain at St. Luke's Hospital in Cedar Rapids, and I had just come down for breakfast to find the first airplane already in the first of the buildings. Those of us who remember also need to remember that there's a whole new generation of people for whom 9/11 is a story of history. That they weren't here on this earth when that happened. But those of us who remember look back on that day as the end of our country's innocence and naivete. Isn't that true? We look back and see the culture of fear that was initiated by the events of September 11th, 2001. It changed everything for us. It changed the way we travel by adding layers of security and security checks to look for explosives, right down to our shoes and our underwear, as you recall. We now focus on building walls and security checkpoints. We have a colored alert system, so now we know how fearful we need to be on any given day. It's changed the way we go to sporting events. I got online, Carl and I are going to go watch a Kansas State football game in the stadium for the first time in a long time, very long time. And there's a whole list of rules about what you can and can't bring in. And now you can't even bring a purse, a fanny pack, can't even bring my case to my binoculars. I have to wear them over my neck. And if I bring anything in, it's a clear plastic bag of a particular size. Such fear divides us and isolates us. And our attempts to feel secure actually cause more anxiety, don't they? They actually feed into our fears. Where is God in all of this? That's a great question, isn't it? Where is God? And it's the same question that the prophet Habakkuk asked God almost 3,000 years ago. So let's take a look at what this prophet has to say and how that might apply for us today. Would you pray with me? Gracious God, we have a great list of fears under which we live. Open our hearts and our minds to hear this conversation that Habakkuk has with you. That even though our current circumstances may not change, we ask that our hearts do. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our thoughts and prayers honor and glorify you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Habakkuk was a prophet and a poet who lived at about 600 BC in Judah. That's the southern part of Israel. His book is not a prophecy, if you read his book. It's really a dialogue with God. Habakkuk looks around his world, his context, and he sees injustices, he sees destruction, He sees violence, he sees conflict everywhere. And worse yet, he looks toward the borders of Judah and he sees the Babylonian army coming on their way. Now, Habakkuk's world was an agriculturally based economy. The whole economy depended on crops and livestock. And Habakkuk knows that if the Babylonians breach the borders, that crops, the livestock, and even the people will be destroyed, because Babylonia was known for that. They were known for absolute and utter destruction of any country that they conquered, and Judah was on the brink of a war with Babylonia. So Habakkuk is looking around and he's taking in all of these circumstances around him. And he sees these people walking on eggshells with their own list of fears in addition to the ones that he saw. And he turns to God and he asks the question that every single one of us ask in fearful times. Where are you, God? How long do we have to wait for you to address these things that are scaring the bejeebers out of us? And God's response is not exactly what Habakkuk expected. What he expected was for God to say something like we read in Isaiah, "Comfort, O comfort my people." But he tells Habakkuk instead, guess what? The worst is yet to come. And he goes into great detail about how Babylon was coming and that God was not going to stop Babylon and that there would be more death and destruction than even Habakkuk could realize. Wow. Way to go, God. We feel better now, don't we? Not. But you see, God's interest wasn't to make Habakkuk feel better. God's interest was to tell Habakkuk the truth of what was coming. So Habakkuk questioned God again, and this time God says, pay attention, Habakkuk. I want you to write this down so that at the right time, the significance of what I'm telling you will be understood. He says, yes, the Babylonians are coming. This is true. But over the long haul, they will eventually reap what they sow and be destroyed. God will have the final word, and God will come in glory. And Habakkuk and all the righteous must live by faith until that time. And Habakkuk must wait for that revelation. You see, instead of choosing to change Habakkuk's circumstances, God chooses instead to change Habakkuk's heart. Habakkuk needed to put his faith in God, to hope even when he couldn't see, to know that God had not abandoned him or the rest of Judah, but that God would give his people the strength to rise above any circumstances that came their way. So in chapter 3, that final chapter in this very small book of the prophet Habakkuk, in responding to his prayer, God gives Habakkuk a vision of God's coming glory, the unfolding of God's kingdom. And it comes with such power and glory that it dwarfs the power of the coming Babylonians. This vision given to Habakkuk helps him see things very differently. It gives him the strength to be confident and patient, and yet to be able to face whatever comes because he will have the strength of the Lord. Now, the very last verse I read, Habakkuk uses a picture. It's a psalm. Would you show the picture? Habakkuk uses the picture of the deer that live along the cliffs of the Judean mountains. That's not a lot of ledge to be on. Did you see that? He's likely seen these deer a whole lot of times. They rise above any predators that come looking for them by scrambling to the high places, which, by the way, is where the people believed God lived, in the higher places. And so with the confidence and sure-footedness, they move with ease along those rock ledges, those crevices. And in Habakkuk's final psalm of praise, he proclaims that the Lord is his strength his confidence. And like the deer that occupy the ledges of that cliff, he can live on the edge with confidence. He has been given strength for the heights. Righteousness will prevail, but it's going to be God's timing, not Habakkuk's timing, not our timing. And Habakkuk responds to God's insight with a prayer of triumph, not fear any longer. Now he more fully understands God's love, God's power, God's presence. And now he can rejoice, even in the light of a fearful and unknown future. He can acknowledge who God is, and he can celebrate that God is his strength for the heights, for those circumstances in which he finds himself on the edge of a precarious cliff. September 11th, 2001 was a painful time in our history. It did, to some degree, mark a loss of the innocence of Americans to the reality of terrorism, something which many of our brothers and sisters around the world had experienced for thousands of years. But rather, remember the pain. Habakkuk invites us to remember the times that God provided the strength for the heights. How God showed up in the midst of tragedy, like the firefighters who ran toward the falling World Trade Center rather than away from it. Like the passengers of American Airlines Flight 93 who steered the plane away from the target, knowing full well that they would die in the attempt to save others' lives. Like the countless rescue workers who dug through the rubble in New York City and at the Pentagon, looking for survivors, or at least looking for the bodies of those who had been lost, so the families would have some closure. It was gruesome and horrifying work, yet they did it. On the one-year anniversary, Governor Tom Vilsack wrote a letter to Iowans, and in that letter he said this: "The defining moment of September 11th has become the individual and collective acts of those heroic people." September 11th gave Americans a new meaning of the word hero. Too often in our culture we think of powerful, wealthy, famous people as heroes, even if they have never done anything heroic. September 11 showed stories of real heroes who sacrificed for others and committed their lives to doing something bigger than themselves. Real heroes, everyday heroes, are the people who make a difference every day in the lives of the people around them. In Iowa today, let us commemorate the memory of September 11th by honoring the everyday heroes in our neighborhoods and hometowns. That was good for September 2002. And I think Governor Vilsack's words are still good for us today. And I think Habakkuk would agree with that. The strength for the heights comes from the God who is already in our midst. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the God of my salvation. God the Lord is my strength, even in the face of what I fear. God makes my feet like the feet of a deer and makes me tread upon the heights. Whoop, we lost the picture. That's all right. There it is again. God makes my feet like the feet of a deer and makes me tread upon the heights. So on this day, the 15th anniversary of a devastating tragedy, we can proclaim that God is in the midst. And our God showed up, and our God continues to show up in the thousands of courageous acts of God's people every day, even today. To God be the glory.